Good morning. Welcome to the Pantheon. This is the Pantheon in Rome, an architectural embodiment of the pantheon of Roman gods who ruled over the ancient world millennia ago. A pantheon of gods is quite common in polytheistic societies. These are societies that worship multiple deities. And in many ways, a society's pantheon stands as the archetypal aspirations of the community, the bastion of that society's values, and a reflection of the people's sense of self-identity. Prior to its conversion to Christianity, the Roman Empire worshipped a whole catalogue of gods and goddesses. There was a deity for almost anything imaginable. In fact, writing in the 1st century, Pliny declared that Rome's population of divine beings could be thought of as larger than that of humans. Imagine that. The human population of Rome at the time was estimated to have been about 1 million people. So that's a lot of gods. But really, there was a god for everything. Raucous was the god of mold. Sterculius had the distinct honor of being the god of manure. But at the top table, there was space for just 12, the Dei Consentis, the most important of them all. The 12 gods and goddesses of the Roman pantheon were comprised of 6 male and 6 female deities, all of whom were remarkably similar to the divine dozen ruling over at the Greek pantheon in Athens. It's fair to suggest that they are the same gods, represented by different names, because much of the mythology stays the same. In Rome, Jupiter was king of the gods, a role performed by Zeus in Athens. Minerva was Athena to the ancient Greeks. Venus was the Roman name for Aphrodite, goddess of love. And of course, Neptune, visiting us today, was known to the Greeks as Poseidon. The 12 gods of the Roman pantheon were Jupiter, supreme god of the Roman pantheon; Juno, queen of heaven; Neptune, god of water; Minerva, goddess of wisdom and a patroness of the arts; Mars, god of war; Venus, goddess of beauty and love; Apollo, god of the sun, music, and poetry; Diana, goddess of chastity, hunting, and the moon; Vulcan and Vesta, both deities of fire; Mercury, messenger of the gods, something of a divine executive assistant; and Ceres, goddess of corn, representing fertility. And the mythology surrounding these divine rulers and protectors of the ancient world is timeless. And in many ways, these myths are as topical today as ever before. So today, we're going to discover the ancient myths of Neptune before time-traveling thousands of years forward to the present day to learn about the more recent tradition of inviting King Neptune on board ships crossing the Equator for a special ceremony and what it means to enter the order of the shellback. But first, the life and times of Neptunus Rex. And let's begin with a very quick refresher of Neptune's family tree, because these names are going to be important for his story. Neptune's parents were Saturn, the mighty lord of the universe, and Ops, who was a beautiful goddess of earth. His brothers were also chief deities, Jupiter and Pluto. His sisters, Ceres, Vesta, and Juno, were senior goddesses around that top table in the pantheon. Neptune's consort was Salacia, with whom he shared 4 children: Rhodes, Triton, Proteus, and Benthesichime. Though these are far from his only offspring, as we will soon find out. So, it's the day before Neptune was born, A heavily pregnant goddess is taking a slow walk around a heavenly Eden. And I mean heavily pregnant, with 6 babies. She's taken a break from the palatial home that she shares with her husband because, well, his paranoia is just too much right now. She's about to give birth to 6 children after all. You see, Saturn, while ruler of the universe, is still relatively new in the role, having usurped his father in something of a coup d'etat. Anyway, so he's busy fussing about whether or not he's going to pass his probation period because some oracle has prophesied about his eventual downfall at the hands of one of his children. Had he taken a moment to consider the situation, to really think about it, he needn't have been concerned. Thousands of years later, Queen Elizabeth would also be usurped by her own child. That's how ruling families go. Anyway, Saturn couldn't get this universe-thieving child out of his head, so Ops had taken to the garden to escape his potent paranoia. But she surely can't have predicted what he would do when she gave birth. Overcome with rage and madness by his predicted downfall, as Ops gives birth, Saturn devours his children one by one, ensuring that none of them would have the opportunity to take him down. Ops is distraught. I'm not sure how long a divine pregnancy is, but it's fair to say that she'd put more effort into the pregnancy than Saturn had. And this wasn't the outcome she'd been anticipating. So she gets clever. After Saturn has swallowed the first 5 of his children, Ops hides the 6th child, Jupiter, and hands Saturn a rock wrapped in swaddling blankets. None the wiser, Saturn swallows the rock and suffers from the most excruciating pains. Think kidney stones and then turn those little stones into baby-sized boulders. There's nothing he can do but retch and bring up all 5 of his swallowed children, plus a rock. Well, Saturn's silly ploy really didn't endear him to his children. It's fair to say that they'd all developed some quite severe trust issues during their short stint in his belly. And, true to prophecy, Saturn's sons, Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto, took their father down and divided the universe into 3 realms, 1 for each of them. Now, the brothers drew lots to determine their individual responsibilities. Jupiter drew the sky and the heavens. Pluto drew for the underworld, and Neptune drew lots for the sea. A complete coincidence, considering the root of his name, the Indo-European word Neptune, which means he who is moist. Serendipitous. He was made for this life. Anyway, the idea of dividing the universe into 3, in theory, provided a sort of check on the balance of power in the heavenly court. But Jupiter, with his responsibilities for the heavens, sort of took the lead. Several thousands of years later, a young country, the United States of America, would create a similar 3-pronged structure for divvying out power. To labor the analogy, Jupiter is the president, Neptune is the Congress, and Pluto, god of the underworld, is the judiciary. But Neptune isn't content on Capitol Hill. He prefers the look of Jupiter's Oval Office and that lovely desk. And let's not forget, that desk is made from the oak timbers of the HMS Resolute. That's a ship. Jupiter is sitting at Neptune's desk. Or at least, that's how Neptune felt. Perhaps Neptune didn't know his own strength. Perhaps his thirst for power was just so great that it blinded him of his better judgment. But in a thunderous moment of megalomania, Neptune charged his trident into the earth, making the whole world tremble and quake. The earth's crust splintered and cracked, and raging water erupted from streams like a steaming volcano. The rivers rushed and rushed, the lakes burst their banks, the oceans flooded over the shorelines, until, in what seemed like no time at all, the whole world was flooded. There was no earth. Everything was flooded. The flood was so severe, so sudden, so unforgiving, that only 2 people survived. Rumor has it that they were amateur zookeepers, and they built an ark. But I may have read that in a different book. Eventually, Neptune calms down and allows his son Triton to call back the seas with a reassuring blow on his magnificent conch. Well, there was land again, but let me tell you, Jupiter was furious, and I mean seething. First, his father tried to eat him. Now his brother has succumbed to the same wild drive for power, and for that, he must be punished. Now, what would be the most impactful punishment for our Congressman Neptune, thought President Jupiter. And it came to him. Neptune would have to serve a mortal. How embarrassing. How belittling. Neptune was presented with a social security number, and head drooped against his chest. He walked the streets looking for employment. And there really weren't good options out there, especially for a very privileged deity who had yet to work a day in his life. Many millennia later, a certain Prince Harry would come close to understanding Neptune's plight. But Neptune served his sentence and secured work as a bricklayer for King Laomedon of Troy. He actually teamed up with another demoted deity, Jupiter's son Phoebus, who had received the same punishment from his father. So as Neptune built up the walls of Troy, Phoebus played his flute to charm the stones into place without Neptune having to bear their heavy weight. And they were a crack team. In next to no time, their task was complete, and they sought their payment from the king. Clearly, the king hadn't heard about Neptune's last temper tantrum, because he refused to pay up. Well, it wasn't long before Troy was flooded, and Phoebus threw in a deadly plague for good measure too. But his punishment was complete, and Neptune returned to the pantheon with whatever modicum of grace he could muster. That said, it's difficult to say that the others really trusted him much at this point. Not only had he tried to steal the top job from his brother, he also, and I hate to tell you this, I really don't like spreading gossip, but he also was very unfaithful to his wife, Salacia. Now, I probably don't know the half of it, but of his infidelities that I'm aware of, he fathered a foal named Arion with the goddess Ceres when she was in the form of a mare. He copulated with Tyro, resulting in the birth of 2 more sons. And after a boozy night singing sea shanties in the Mediterranean, things got a little spicy with the sea nymph Thusa, and she ended up pregnant with the Cyclops Polyphemus. Well, it would be indecent to show you Neptune's full tree of descendants. But Salacia, she stood by him. She rode alongside him on his giant seashell, flanked by whales, seahorses, sea gods, and other creatures as he ruled over the world's great oceans. I don't like to spread rumors. I just think it's important that you know who we're dealing with when we attend his court this afternoon, for your protection. So let's talk about ceremonies for Neptune. And let's start way back in ancient Rome. Neptune really wasn't a broadly worshipped god. Romans preferred to credit Fortunus, god of luck, for their naval victories than Neptune. But there was one annual festival dedicated to Neptune, interestingly nothing to do with the sea. Neptunalia, which was held at the end of July, or Quintilis to the locals, was an annual plea for rain, because Neptune, of course, was the god of all waters, and not just those with 3.5% salt content. But from the ancient Romans, that really was it. Neptune was actually somewhat overlooked. But not anymore. For most of his long history, Neptune resided in the Mediterranean Sea. But that wasn't his forever home. So he upped sticks and he moved to the Equator, where he has been very, very happy ever since, save for a few uninvited visitors. The modern era of acknowledging King Neptune during a ship's crossing of the Equator is dated back to the 17th or 18th centuries. And as with many naval traditions, Britain had a strong hand in developing the narrative. According to Joseph Banks' diary entries from on board Captain Cook's HMS Endeavour in 1768, the crew drew up a manifest of everyone on board, including the animals, and demanded of each to know if he had previously crossed the equator. If they had not, then they had a choice. Sacrifice your allowance of wine for 4 days, or be subjected to a ducking ceremony, in which they would be held underwater in the ocean 3 times. Over the years, customs and traditions have evolved, and the practice of honoring King Neptune when crossing the equator by ship is now common practice on cargo, cruise, and military vessels. Now, we're going to talk about our upcoming Neptune ceremony, but first, I want you to hear what it's like in the US Navy.
My name is Jim Ellis. I was an ensign in the Navy on the USS McDonough, DLG-8, out of Charleston, South Carolina. In about 1974, we crossed the equator.
Now, who knows? Things might have changed in the Navy over the last 50 years, or it might be just the same. But just be relieved that we won't be doing this sort of Neptune ceremony today.
We were all rousted from our bunks at about 4 in the morning and taken down to the mess decks. Now, my chief petty officer had warned me ahead of time to wear 4 or 5 pairs of underwear and knee pads, if I could, so I constructed some socks and tied them around my knees, because you do a lot of crawling during this ceremony. And we had to eat breakfast first, and breakfast was green eggs and ham, because they wanted you to have a full stomach. For weeks before, they had stored ship's garbage in bags, garbage bags, up on the 03, 04 level in the sun. So the garbage rotted in the bags for several days, probably several weeks actually. And then they put the garbage in chutes that they had constructed out of canvas. And you had to crawl on your hands and knees from the bow of the ship to the stern of the ship through the chutes of garbage, which was just disgusting because you got it in your eyes and your nose and your mouth. You kept your mouth closed if you possibly could. And as you're crawling from the bow to the stern on the deck, the sailors and other officers had shillelaghs.
Now, these handcrafted shillelaghs were made of lengths of rubber hose pipe from the ship's fire hydrant system, and the pollywogs were whipped. And the shellbacks administering the whipping, well, they certainly weren't gentle. But it gets worse.
At the end of this tunnel, there would be a chief petty officer who was particularly obese, very fat stomach, and they would take a cherry, a maraschino cherry, and shove it in his navel and squirt mayonnaise and mustard and ketchup around his navel.
It already sounds pretty rough, but that's not all. Before you were allowed to end your own torture and eat the hairy belly cherry, pollywogs had a raw oyster with Tabasco sauce poured in their mouth.
So I think I threw up about 6 times on this entire endeavor, because it was just, and it was hot. It was hot, and you're crawling. I remember crawling on the deck, and the deck is all coated with a real rough. So it's non-skid, it's called. It's paint with sand in it. So when you're crawling along, you can really get messed up with that too. And then getting hit was really painful. That was not pleasant at all.
This really doesn't sound like the sort of thing that you'd choose to take part in.
I was the junior officer on board, and I never considered I had a choice. I don't think No, I don't think you can opt out. I don't know anybody who would. I think it's all just part of the camaraderie and being on the ship and going through the initiation the same as everybody else. So I think the peer pressure was such that it was never a consideration. Nobody ever said, oh, you don't have to do this. That was never suggested.
Thank you very much indeed to Jim Ellis. Well, I think you'll all be relieved to hear that our ceremony this afternoon will be a little tamer than that in the Navy. But here, as with the Navy, we take that initiation ceremony of crossing the equator seriously, and we love the tradition of the occasion, marked with the acceptance into special orders of the shellback. Today, we're going to be admitted into the Order of the Shellback for crossing the equator, but seafarers often strive to enter more and more exclusive orders of the Court of King Neptune. The Order of the Ebony Shellback is for those that have crossed the equator on Lake Victoria. The Golden Shellback is for those reserved for crossing the equator on the 180th meridian, the international date line. Rarer yet is the Emerald Shellback, which acknowledges crossing the equator exactly on the prime meridian. My favorite, just because it's so absurdly niche, is the Order of the Purple Porpoises. Now, you can only enter this order if, and only if, you cross the equator and the international date line at the sacred hour of the vernal equinox. Now, that sounds like a club without very many members. There are only 2 ships in history to be designated as Star-Spangled Shellbacks for crossing the equator on July 4th. The first was the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1966, and the second happened just a couple of years ago, the CGC Steadfast. So now, I'm sure everybody's very excited to be attending the Court of King Neptune this afternoon, perhaps becoming a shellback for the first time. So what can we expect on deck at 2 p.m.? Well, first of all, and this is important, all of the team members involved in today's event have volunteered to take part. And there are no whips. The judge presides over the ceremony, at which polywogs, those who haven't previously crossed the equator by ship, are brought before the ship's executive committee and King Neptune himself. Each polywog will have his or her case heard by the court, who will deal a ruling. There may be a little bit of muck, there may be a little bit of slime, there will certainly be some fish kissing. And if the newly inducted shellbacks are lucky, then they might be allowed to rinse off in the pool. Otherwise, they will be left on the side to bake. It's a lot of fun. It is a true time-honored tradition, and I don't want to spoil any more of the surprises. So with that, thank you for coming this morning, and I will see you at 2 o'clock in the court of the mighty King Neptune.